So as I was doing research to figure out, which environmental or social justice event that I wanted to speak about regarding what kind of shaped Houston today, I kind of started off thinking about what we were talking about last week, which was sustainable development goals. And the one that I had chosen was SDG number 10, which was racial injustice. Where, I found 45 economically distressed zip codes and kind of figured out where they were within Houston. And I found that they're mostly on kind of the eastern side of Houston. 45 of those zip codes, 8 of them were majority Black, and 28 of them were majority Hispanic. So it was pretty clear to me. And so going into this week, I'm like, okay, knowing where they were, why are they where they are? So I kind of wanted to look into what the history of the planning department looked like in Houston. And from what I found was it's a pretty rocky road where the planning department was officially kind of brought together. But the 1920s was a pivotal time within Houston's growth. Some of the trends of the population trends were just skyrocketing between 1920 and 1930, and it kind of started back around 1910. Between 1920 and 1930 alone, it doubled. It went from 138,000 to 292,000 residents. So, it was just a crucial time in Houston history. As I dug a little bit deeper, that's where I found Houston's Property Owners League, 350 property owners who protested zoning laws being proposed by the Planning Commission. And, as again, someone else kind of mentioned, you think of who property owners were down in the South in the 20s. They're going to be wealthy. They're going to be white. And they're probably going to own a lot of land. So that gives them a lot of power. And they're the decision makers at the end of the day. So also within the 20s, 1927, I found that Texas passed 6 laws. So the state of Texas passed 6 laws. And one law that they passed, a lot of them were revolved around zoning, giving cities the ability to have control over the land. But one of those laws were to give cities more control of laying the land, and specifically was giving the city controls to segregate blacks and whites. So that kind of lays it out for you. And as you can see during, in the slides, you see kind of a lot of these racial injustices being seen, kind of starting with in the 70s. The Bean versus Southwestern Management Corporation, kind of that fight against environmental racism regarding landfills that were predominantly in Black neighborhoods, and the fight against that, as well as the riots earlier on in the 70s. And I was like, okay, what are the 70s? The 70s were a time where social expression and kind of racial riots were happening within the urban areas. So those don't come to any surprise to me as we look in the time events. But basically, racial injustice is something that has been kind of going on for a very long time, specifically in the South, and is kind of still going on within Houston now. You think of where the hurricanes and the funding that's going to help those, vulnerable communities build themselves back up. But what I was kind of looking into, and I actually looked into a little bit tonight, and I'm going to post 2 pictures. I'm going to post a picture of the EPA maps of Houston, where the air quality is very poor, and where you see a lot of the oil companies and manufacturing and the industrial areas. And then I'm going to show you the map of the vulnerable zip codes. So so that's pretty much kind of what I've gotten out of this project and the timeline, is that there's been a lot dating back to the 1920s of just racial injustice and the planning around that, kind of bordering off these wealthier communities from those that are kind of struggling and putting